1 year after the funeral, 1 year after the coffin was lowered into the ground, the world had finally stopped asking him to move on. And that was when it happened. On an ordinary evening train, surrounded by tired faces and flickering lights, he looked up and saw his wife sitting just a few feet away. The same face he had identified at the morgue. The same woman whose death certificate he still kept folded in his wallet. She was alive, breathing, real. His heart slammed against his ribs as questions crashed in all at once. Was he losing his mind? Or had the world lied to him? Because if she was alive, then her death wasn't a tragedy, it was an injustice. And someone had gone to terrifying lengths to make sure the truth stayed buried. Before we dive into this story, let me know where you're watching from and your local time in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe if you're ready for a story that goes far deeper than it first appears. The train screeched as it slid into the station, metal screaming against metal, and for a brief moment, the sound drowned out the pounding in his chest. He stood frozen near the door, fingers clenched around the cold steel pole, afraid that if he moved even an inch, the woman sitting across from him would vanish like smoke. 1 year, exactly 1 year, since he had stood in a black suit beside a grave, listening to strangers murmur condolences about a life that had ended too soon. 1 year since he had signed papers confirming her death, since he had stared at a still face and forced himself to accept that love could simply stop. And now she was here, alive, close enough that he could see the faint line near her eyebrow, the one she'd gotten years ago from a broken glass, the scar he used to trace with his thumb on quiet nights. His mind scrambled for logic. Grief did this to people, didn't it? Hallucinations, wishful thinking, the brain clinging to what it had lost. But hallucinations didn't breathe. They didn't shift their weight when the train lurched. They didn't absently twist an empty ring finger, exactly the way she used to whenever she was nervous. That small, unconscious gesture hit him harder than the resemblance. His throat tightened, and for a second, the air felt too thin to breathe. He told himself to look away, to blink, to let the moment pass, but his eyes refused to move, locked on her profile as the train rattled through the tunnel. She hadn't noticed him yet, or maybe she had, and was pretending not to. The thought sent a cold ripple down his spine, because if she knew he was there, if she was avoiding his gaze, then this wasn't madness, it was something else, something deliberate. The train slowed, the automated voice announced the next stop, cheerful and indifferent, as if nothing in the world was wrong. Around them, passengers gathered their bags, checked their phones, prepared to step back into ordinary lives. His heart thudded harder with every second. If she stood up and walked out, he knew he would follow. He also knew that once he did, there would be no going back to the quiet, empty existence he had barely learned to survive. She rose as the doors opened. For the first time, her eyes flicked toward him. The contact lasted less than a heartbeat, but it was enough. There was recognition there, not confusion, not curiosity, fear. Her expression tightened, and she turned away quickly, disappearing into the flow of people spilling onto the platform. His body moved before his thoughts caught up. He pushed through the crowd, pulse roaring in his ears, calling her name silently because his voice refused to work. The platform was slick with rain, reflections of neon lights shimmering underfoot. He spotted her dark coat ahead, the same hurried stride he remembered so well, and followed at a distance, terrified she would look back and see him again. As they climbed the station stairs, memories collided with the present in brutal flashes. Hospital corridors, police officers speaking in careful, rehearsed tones, a closed casket funeral because the accident had been too severe, details he had accepted because he'd had no strength left to question them. Standing there now, watching her merge into the city night, those memories cracked. If she was alive, then everything he had endured, the loneliness, the guilt, the endless nights replaying their last argument, had been built on a lie. Outside, the rain fell harder, soaking through his jacket as he followed her down a side street. She moved with purpose, head down, as if she knew exactly where she was going. Not the behavior of someone resurrected from the dead, not the behavior of someone free. The injustice of it burned in his chest. Someone had taken a year of his life, a year of grief and silence, and stolen it from him. And worse, they had taken her away and forced her into hiding. She turned a corner and vanished. He stopped short, heart hammering, scanning the street. Old apartment buildings loomed on either side, windows dark, the rain muting the sounds of the city. For a moment, panic surged. Had he lost her? Had this all been some cruel trick of his mind after all? Then he saw the faint glow of a hallway light flicker on inside one of the buildings. A door closed softly. Final, definite. He stood there in the rain long after, water dripping from his hair, his hands trembling not from cold, but from the realization settling deep in his bones. This wasn't a miracle reunion. This was the beginning of something far more dangerous. If she was alive, then someone had worked very hard to make sure the world believed she was dead, and people who did that didn't leave loose ends. As he finally turned away, one truth echoed louder than the rest. Following her had already changed everything. Whatever waited behind that closed door, whatever secrets, betrayals, or crimes had been buried with her fake death, were now tied to him. And whether he was ready or not, the life he thought was over had just pulled him back into a story he didn't yet understand. He didn't sleep that night. The image of her disappearing behind that apartment door replayed over and over, sharper each time, as if his mind were punishing him for daring to doubt it. Morning came quietly, pale light slipping through the blinds of his small apartment, illuminating the life he had built in the ruins of hers. Everything in that space had been arranged around loss. The extra chair stayed pushed under the table, untouched. Her mug still sat at the back of the cupboard, clean but never used. He had told himself these habits were a form of respect, a way to keep her close without going insane. Now they felt like evidence, proof of how thoroughly he had been fooled. He showered, dressed, and went to work as if routine could anchor him to reality. Colleagues nodded, exchanged polite words, avoided his eyes the way people always did when they knew your story and didn't know what to say. To them, he was the widower who had handled tragedy with quiet dignity. They admired his restraint. They had no idea that beneath his calm exterior, a storm was tearing itself apart, demanding answers. Every sound startled him. Every woman with a similar silhouette made his pulse jump. He checked his phone compulsively, half expecting a message that would confirm it had all been a dream. By lunchtime, denial gave way to obsession. He pulled up the official report on his computer, the one he had sworn never to read again. The language was clinical, distant, time of death, cause of death, identification confirmed. He remembered standing in that cold room, forcing himself to look at a face that barely resembled the woman he loved because he needed closure. Now the memory felt corrupted, unreliable. How had he been so certain? How many questions had he swallowed because grief had drained him of the strength to fight? He printed the report and folded it into his jacket, leaving work early under the pretense of a headache that wasn't entirely a lie. The city felt different as he walked, sharper at the edges, like a set built to hide secrets behind every wall. He found himself back on that rain-darkened street without consciously deciding to go there. The apartment building stood exactly as it had the night before, unremarkable, aging, easy to overlook. He watched from across the road, heart pounding, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. Hours passed. Tenants came and went. Lights flicked on and off. She never appeared. Doubt crept back in, insidious and cruel. Maybe she had left through another exit. Maybe she had never been there at all. Just as he was about to give up, an elderly woman stepped outside to smoke, glancing at him with mild suspicion. On impulse, he crossed the street. He asked about the building, about the woman who had come in last night. He kept his voice casual, careful not to reveal too much. The woman studied him for a long moment, then shrugged. "Yes," she said. Someone new had moved into one of the upstairs units. Quiet, kept to herself, paid in cash, no visitors. The words sent a chill through him. People who paid in cash and avoided attention usually had reasons. That night, he sat at his kitchen table and spread the papers out before him, comparing dates, times, signatures. Tiny inconsistencies began to emerge once he allowed himself to look for them. A witness statement filed later than the others, a doctor's name he didn't recognize. The absence of photographs he remembered asking for and being told weren't necessary. Each detail alone meant nothing. Together, they formed a shape he couldn't ignore. Anger replaced numbness. He thought of the nights he had spent blaming himself, replaying every argument, every moment he had chosen work over her, silence over honesty. Someone had watched him crumble and had done nothing. Worse, they had engineered it. The unfairness of it pressed down on his chest until breathing hurt. Grief had been heavy, but this was sharper, fueled by betrayal and the terrifying possibility that she had suffered alone while he mourned an empty grave. He began to dig carefully. Too much attention would be dangerous. He knew that instinctively. He started with public records, then moved to less obvious sources, a clerk at City Hall who talked too much. An online forum where professionals complained about bureaucratic nonsense. A name surfaced more than once, tied loosely to the paperwork surrounding her death. Not a name he remembered, but one that felt deliberately placed, like a buffer between truth and accountability. As evening settled in, exhaustion finally dragged him down. He sat in the dark, city noise humming outside, and let the reality of his situation sink in. If she was alive, she was hiding for a reason. If he pushed too hard, too fast, he might put her back in danger or expose himself to people who clearly had no issue erasing someone from existence. The thought terrified him, but it didn't stop him. It hardened something inside him. Instead, he made a decision then, quiet and irreversible. He would find the truth, piece by piece, without confronting her again, until he understood what he was walking into. Love had once made him gentle. Loss had made him careful. Now, injustice was teaching him how to be patient. The story he had believed for a year was a lie, and he was done being the passive victim of it. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, fading into the night. Somewhere above him, in a building not far away, a woman he had buried was breathing under a different name, and between them stretched a past that had been rewritten by hands he was about to force into the light. The next evening, he rode the same train, boarded at the same platform, and stood in nearly the same spot by the doors. It felt absurd, like tempting fate, but instinct told him patterns mattered. People who hid their lives still clung to routine. He kept his head down this time, watching reflections in the window instead of faces directly, letting the movement of the car reveal what his eyes might miss. Each stop tightened his chest. Each new passenger felt like a false alarm. When the doors opened at the third station, his breath caught. She stepped inside, rain-speckled coat buttoned high, hair tucked beneath a hood. The resemblance no longer shocked him. What stunned him was the certainty. This wasn't a trick of grief. It was her, alive in the most ordinary way possible. She stood near the pole, swayed with the train, and stared at the route map as if memorizing it for the 100th time. He noticed the new details. Now the way she kept distance from others, the way her eyes tracked the doors at every stop, the tension coiled beneath her calm. Someone afraid learns how to look invisible. He didn't follow immediately when she got off. He waited a full minute, heart pounding, then stepped onto the platform as the doors slid shut behind him. She was already halfway up the stairs. He kept a careful distance, matching her pace, counting breaths, reminding himself not to rush. The city greeted them with wet pavement and blurred lights. She crossed the street without looking back. He followed when the signal changed, the gap between them, stretching and shrinking like a living thing. This time, she didn't go straight to the apartment building. She took a longer route, winding through quieter blocks, stopping once at a corner cafe without going in. He realized then that she was checking reflections too. Windows, parked cars, the dark glass of a storefront. The awareness sent a shiver through him. She wasn't just hiding from the past, she was hiding from someone who might be close. When she finally reached the building, she paused at the entrance. He slowed, pretending to study his phone. The door opened, and she slipped inside. He waited until the light in the hallway flicked on, then crossed the street and stood beneath the awning, rain tapping against metal. He watched the windows, memorizing which ones stayed dark and which glowed. After a few minutes, a light came on at the third-floor corner. He felt an absurd swell of relief, as if proof of her existence depended on that small square of illumination. He didn't knock. Not yet. Instead, he turned away and walked until his legs ached, letting the city drain some of the adrenaline from his veins. Back home, he sat at his table and sketched timelines on scrap paper. Dates, locations, names. The gaps bothered him most: a death without photographs, a closed casket explained too quickly, a doctor whose credentials were oddly hard to verify. He circled the name again and again, the pen digging through the paper. The following days blurred into a careful dance. He adjusted his schedule, rode different trains, lingered near the building at varying hours. He learned her rhythms without intruding. Mornings early, evenings cautious, groceries purchased in small amounts, paid for in cash. No friends visited, no laughter floated from the windows. Once, late at night, he saw her silhouette pacing, phone pressed to her ear, shoulders tight. He couldn't hear the words, but the posture spoke of strain, of conversations that never brought comfort. The unfairness of it gnawed at him. While he had been learning how to survive grief, she had been learning how to disappear. He didn't know which was worse. The question that haunted him most wasn't why she had left, but who had forced her hand. People didn't erase themselves, unless the alternative was unbearable. A breakthrough came by accident, at a corner newsstand near the station. He recognized the clerk from months ago, the man who had sold him a paper on the morning after the funeral, offering condolences with awkward sincerity. He bought a magazine he didn't want and asked, casually, whether anything strange had happened in the neighborhood last year. The clerk hesitated, then shrugged. There had been rumors, he said. An accident reported quickly. A body transferred late at night. A doctor who didn't usually work that shift. The details were fuzzy, secondhand, but the pattern was familiar. Too neat, too quiet. That night, his phone buzzed with a notification he hadn't expected, an alert from a public records site he'd subscribed to days earlier. A minor update, a document amended. The same doctor's name. The timing sent a chill through him. Someone was still adjusting the past. Even now, he realized then that waiting carried its own risks. If the truth was being managed, it meant the people behind it were vigilant. Sooner or later, they would notice him hovering at the edges. The thought of her being caught in the middle, punished for his curiosity, made his stomach twist. He needed to speak to her, carefully, on his terms. He chose a moment when the street was quiet, when the rain softened the sounds, and the building exhaled. As tenants settled in, he climbed the stairs slowly, every step loud in his ears, and stopped outside the third-floor door. The hallway smelled faintly of old paint and damp carpet. He raised his hand, hesitated, then knocked once soft but unmistakable. Silence stretched. He heard movement inside, a breath held. The door opened a fraction, chain still on. Her eyes met his through the gap, and the world seemed to narrow to that space between them. Fear flared there again, sharper this time, edged with something else, recognition mixed with resolve. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "I know," he said, voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "But neither should a dead woman." Her jaw tightened. For a long second, neither of them moved. Then, quietly, she slid the chain free and opened the door just enough to let him in, eyes flicking down the hallway as if expecting footsteps. As the door closed behind him, he understood that the line he'd been circling for days had finally been crossed. Whatever came next would demand more than patience. It would demand the truth. The apartment was smaller than he expected, sparsely furnished, as if permanence were forbidden here. A narrow couch pressed against one wall. A single chair near a scratched table. Curtains drawn tight despite the dim light outside. She moved quickly, locking the door, checking the windows, her motions efficient and practiced. Watching her like this hurt in a way he hadn't prepared for. This was not the woman he had married, the one who left mugs in the sink and hummed while cooking, but the shape of her, sharpened by caution. "You followed me," she said quietly, not accusing, just stating a fact. "I saw you on the train," he replied. "I tried not to. I failed." She exhaled, a thin, controlled sound, then gestured for him to sit. He remained standing, afraid that if he lowered himself, the room would tilt and everything would unravel. Up close, the details were undeniable. The scar, the faint crease between her brows when she frowned, the warmth of a living presence filling the space. His hands curled into fists to keep from reaching for her. "You shouldn't have come," she said again, softer now. "It isn't safe." "For whom?" he asked. "You or me?" Her eyes flicked to the door. Both. Silence settled, heavy with things unsaid. He felt anger stirring, but he forced it down. "This wasn't a trial. Not yet. They told me you were dead," he said. "They buried you." "I know." The admission landed hard. His breath hitched. "Why?" She closed her eyes briefly, as if bracing herself. "Because staying would have been worse." The words sliced through him. Worse than letting him believe she was gone. Worse than the nights he'd spent blaming himself for every missed call, every harsh word. He swallowed, steadying his voice. "You don't get to decide that alone." "I didn't," she said. "Not really." That was the crack. He leaned forward, every nerve alive. Who decided? She hesitated, and in that hesitation, he saw the depth of the fear she carried. Not panic, calculated dread. "You're asking questions that put you in danger." She said, "I spent a year making sure no one noticed me. You've undone that in a week." "Someone noticed me long before that," he replied. "They noticed you too. Enough to make you disappear." Her jaw tightened. "Lower your voice." He did, though the hallway outside was empty. "I saw the paperwork," he continued. "The doctor's name, the timing, the things that don't add up. I need you to tell me the truth." She paced once, then stopped in front of him. "The truth is messy," she said. "And once you have it, you don't get to put it back." "I already can't," he said. "I watched you die. I mourned you. Whatever this is, it's already ruined the life I thought I had left." Her shoulders sagged, just a fraction. The hardened lines softened. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered. "And yet?" She nodded, accepting it. "I was threatened," she said. "Not in the dramatic way you imagine. No notes, no masked men, just consequences laid out calmly by people who had the power to enforce them. They wanted something I had access to, information. I refused, so they gave me a choice: vanish, or let the people I loved pay the price." He felt the room tilt after all. "They used me," he said, the realization bitter. "They knew I'd believe the story. They knew you'd survive it," she said. "That's why they chose you." The injustice of it flared hot. "Survive it, as if survival were a favor." "Who are they?" he demanded. "I can't say names," she replied immediately. "Not yet. It's not paranoia. It's procedure. I don't know who listens." He took a breath, forcing calm. "Then tell me what you can." She glanced at the window, then back at him. The accident was staged. A body was substituted. The records were altered. A doctor was paid to sign what he was told to sign. A police report was expedited before questions could form. I was moved that night. New identity, new address, cash, silence. "And if you broke it," her mouth curved in a humorless smile, "they promised to make my death real." He closed his eyes, the weight of it pressing down. "Why show yourself now?" he asked. "Why the train?" "I didn't mean to," she said. "I was careless. I thought enough time had passed." "Time doesn't erase people," he said. It just teaches them how to wait. A sound echoed faintly from the street below, tires hissing on wet pavement. She flinched, he noticed. They're watching, he said. Always, she replied. Which is why you need to leave. Not until we decide what comes next. There is no we, she said, and then faltered. There can't be. He stepped closer, careful, and to say, and quote, giving her space while refusing distance. You don't get to vanish again, he said gently. Not without answers, not without a plan. Her eyes searched his, weighing risk against something older and harder to kill. If you stay involved, she said, you become leverage. I already am, he said. To them, to you, to the truth. A knock sounded at the door. They froze. Her face drained of color. She lifted a finger to her lips, then moved silently to the peephole. He watched her shoulders rise and fall as she breathed. After a long moment, she shook her head, no one visible. Another knock followed, firmer this time. Who is it? She called, voice steady. Building management, came a man's voice. Quick check. She met his gaze, fear flaring bright and unmistakable. He understood then that this was no coincidence. Someone had noticed the disruption. Someone had followed the thread back to her door. Go, she mouthed. He shook his head. The knock came again, impatient. The quiet life she had built was cracking. He stepped toward the door, positioning himself between her and the sound. Whatever happened next would confirm what he already knew. The past wasn't finished with them, and it wouldn't be satisfied until someone paid. The knock echoed again, sharper this time, each rap landing like a countdown. He felt the tension in the room thicken, every instinct, screaming that whatever stood on the other side of that door was not there for a routine inspection. She moved first, crossing the room in swift, silent steps, retrieving a folder from beneath the couch cushion. She pressed it into his hands. If they come in, she whispered, you leave with this. What is it? He asked. Though his eyes were already scanning the contents, photocopies, handwritten notes, dates circled in red. Proof, she said, or at least the beginning of it. The door rattled again. Ma'am, the voice called, polite, too polite. We need to verify a maintenance issue reported by a neighbor. She met his gaze, something desperate and resolute crossing her face. You shouldn't be here, she mouthed again. But this time the words sounded like an apology. He stepped back, heart hammering, as she slipped the folder into his jacket and pushed him toward the narrow bathroom at the back. Window, she whispered. Fire escape. He hesitated, anger and fear tangling in his chest. I'm not running. You are, she said firmly. For both of us. Another knock. Harder now. The chain on the door rattled as if tested. He realized then that whatever fragile protection anonymity had given her was gone. They had been noticed. He moved, climbing out onto the slick metal of the fire escape. Just as she unlocked the door, cold air hit his face. Below, the alley yawned, dark and wet. He descended quickly, hands shaking, boots slipping once before finding balance. When his feet hit the ground, he looked up instinctively. The apartment window was dark. No sound, no sign of struggle, just silence, swallowing the moment whole. He didn't wait to see more. Instinct drove him away from the building, through narrow streets and shadows, until his lungs burned and his legs ached. Only when he reached the main road did he slow, blending into foot traffic, forcing his breathing to steady. The folder pressed against his ribs like a second heart, heavy with implication. Back in his apartment, he locked the door, closed the blinds, and spread the contents across the table. The documents were fragmented but damning. Copies of medical transfer forms stamped with the same doctor's name, a handwritten schedule detailing movements, times, locations, a burner phone number scribbled in the margin beside a single word, handler. One page held a list of names, some crossed out, others circled with notes he couldn't fully decipher yet. It felt like stepping into the aftermath of a crime without knowing where the body was buried. His hands trembled, as anger settled into something colder and more focused. This wasn't just about her disappearance, it was a system. A machine that made people vanish quietly, efficiently, and without consequence. And he had brushed against it, without even realizing. Hours passed as he pieced together what he could. He cross-referenced names online, traced shell companies, found patterns that pointed toward influence rather than coincidence. The doctor appeared again and again, a signature in multiple cases where details were sealed or rushed. The sense of injustice grew heavier with every connection. How many lives had been rewritten while he mourned just one? A notification pinged on his phone. Unknown number. He stared at the screen, pulse spiking, then answered. Silence greeted him at first, followed by controlled breathing on the other end. You shouldn't have gone back, a man's voice said calmly. His blood ran cold. Who is this? A courtesy call. The voice replied, You've been very curious lately. Curiosity leads people into accidents. He gripped the edge of the table. You faked her death. A pause. We resolved a problem. You benefited. By losing a year of my life. You're still alive, the man said. That's more than some get, rage flared. What do you want? For you to stop, the voice answered. And to return what you were given, the folder. He said nothing. You have 24 hours, the man continued, tone unchanged. After that, we stopped being polite. The call ended. He stood there long after, the quiet roaring in his ears. Fear pressed in, but beneath it burned something unyielding. They had underestimated him. They thought grief had hollowed him out, made him compliant. They were wrong. Grief had sharpened him. Injustice had given him purpose. He thought of her standing in that apartment, living half a life under borrowed shadows. Thought of the knock at the door, the way danger had arrived wearing a friendly mask. Running would mean abandoning her to the very people who had orchestrated this nightmare. Compliance would mean accepting that truth belonged only to the powerful. He packed a bag with essentials, slipped the folder into a waterproof sleeve, and left his apartment before dawn. If they were watching, he wouldn't make it easy. He headed toward the one place he had avoided since the funeral, the station, where everything had begun. Public spaces offered anonymity. Movement offered cover. As the train doors closed and the city began to slide past, he understood the cost of what he was choosing. This path would not end neatly. There would be threats, losses, moments he'd wish he had never followed her off that train. But there would also be answers. And someone, somewhere, would have to answer for the lie that had stolen a year of his life. Whatever they had planned, he was no longer just a widower chasing a ghost. He was a witness. And witnesses, once they decided to speak, were dangerous. The station was already awake when he arrived. Commuters flooding the platforms with the dull rhythm of routine. He blended into the crowd easily. Hood up, eyes alert, the folder secured against his side. Public places made him feel safer, not safe, but less exposed. Whoever had called him thrived in shadows and quiet control. Noise and witnesses complicated that. He boarded a train, heading in the opposite direction from his usual route, choosing movement over destination. As the city slid past the windows, he replayed the call in his mind, dissecting tone and timing. A courtesy call, a warning. They knew where he lived. They knew what he'd taken, which meant they'd already been inside her apartment or were about to be. The thought made his stomach twist. He had left her alone with people who erased lives. At the next stop, he stepped off and crossed the platform. Boarding another train at random, he watched reflections more than faces, memorizing patterns. A man who looked at him too long. A woman who stepped off when he did. Nothing obvious. That worried him more than being followed openly. Professionals didn't rush. He spent the morning moving stations, cafes, libraries, anywhere with cameras and crowds. Between stops, he opened the folder again, this time with a clearer purpose. Proof needed context. Context needed corroboration. He focused on the circled names first, tracing corporate records and licensing boards on public terminals. One name led to a consulting firm with no website and a mailbox address. Another to a logistics company that didn't advertise, but held contracts with hospitals and municipal services. The pattern tightened. This wasn't a lone fixer. It was infrastructure. A break came mid-afternoon, small but sharp. A crossed-out name from the list matched an obituary from 2 years earlier. A sudden medical event, cremated within 48 hours. Minimal details. The attending physician was the same. He felt the click in his chest when coincidence died and certainty took its place. The doctor wasn't a participant. He was a tool. He left the library and found a quiet bench overlooking a busy street. Phone to his ear, dialing a number he'd avoided out of pride and fear. A woman answered on the third ring, voice crisp and guarded. "I need help," he said without preamble. "Not sympathy, expertise." A pause. "You don't call unless it's bad," she replied. "Where are you?" "Moving," he said. "I think someone staged a death. I think they're still cleaning up." Another pause, longer this time. "If you're right," she said carefully, "you don't come to me in person. You don't send files. You don't confront anyone. You listen. I am listening." "Good," she said. "Then listen to this. You're not the first widower to come asking questions. Most stop when they're told to. Some don't. Those don't last. Neither did my wife," he said. Silence stretched, then a sigh. "Send nothing. Say nothing. Meet me where the river bends. By the old footbridge, dusk." He ended the call and sat back, pulse thudding. The unfairness of it pressed in again, the fact that survival now depended on alliances he never wanted. He watched traffic flow, ordinary and oblivious, and felt the distance between this world and the one he'd stumbled into widen at dusk. The river reflected bruised light, the footbridge creaking under passing bikes. She arrived without ceremony, coat collar turned up, eyes scanning. They walked side by side without greeting, speaking only after they'd crossed to the far bank. "You have something," she said. "I have fragments," he replied. "And a deadline," he summarized quickly. Sticking to facts, the train, the apartment, the knock, the call. She didn't interrupt, but he noticed the tightening around her eyes at the doctor's name. "I've seen that signature before," she said when he finished. "Always near the edges, never central enough to draw heat." "Who's central?" he asked. "People who don't leave fingerprints," she said. "They leave incentives." They stopped beneath a willow, branches brushing the water. "Here's the part you won't like," she continued. "If they've contacted you directly, they're assessing risk. That means they're unsure. That's leverage, but it's temporary. They want the folder," he said. "They want to know what you know," she corrected. "And who else might know? And, He nodded. "She's in danger." "Yes," she said simply. "And so are you." He swallowed. "How do I protect her?" "You don't," she said. "You expose the system fast enough that hurting her costs them more than letting her live. That sounds like a gamble." "It is," she said, "but it's the only one that shifts power." They talked strategy in low voices, building a path from fragments to pressure points, oversight boards, journalists with legal backing, redundant drops, timelines that forced responses. It felt like learning a new language under fire. He absorbed it anyway, because the alternative was silence. When they parted, she handed him a prepaid phone. "Use this," she said, "and stop going home." Night settled in heavy and humid. He found a cheap hotel near a terminal, paid cash, and took the stairs. Inside the room, he sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the blank wall, exhaustion finally catching up. The folder lay open beside him. The past spread thin and vulnerable. The new phone vibrated. A message, short and precise. "They came back. I'm not there anymore." Don't look for me. Trust the plan. Relief and fear collided, leaving him shaky. She was alive, moving, still choosing survival. He typed back only one word, always. Another message followed. Unknown number this time. Clocks ticking. He powered the phone down and stood, decision settling into place. 24 hours was their deadline. He would use every minute, not to beg, not to return what they'd stolen, but to make sure that when the clock ran out, the truth was already moving unstoppable. Indifferent to threats, he packed up and left the room, stepping into the night with a clarity that surprised him. Grief had taught him how to endure. This had taught him how to fight. And somewhere between the river and the rails, he understood that the story they'd tried to bury was finally awake. He moved through the city with a precision he hadn't known he possessed. Every block was mapped in his mind. Camera angles, reflective surfaces, escape routes, potential witnesses. The folder pressed against his side, heavier now with responsibility than with paper. It contained pieces of a life that had been stolen from him, and from her a puzzle deliberately scattered to make reconstruction impossible. But impossibility, he decided, was a challenge, not a barrier. He started at the edge of the district where she had been hiding. Low-rise buildings with narrow alleys, streetlights flickering, the faint smell of rain still clinging to the asphalt. Every window could conceal an observer. Every open door could hide a threat. He paused at the corner, scanning the street for patterns. The man who had been leaning against a wall earlier, the taxi that lingered too long at the stoplight, the way a shopkeeper's gaze lingered just a second too long. They were all elements of a larger design, he realized, one he was only beginning to see. He made his way to a small cafe where she had briefly stopped the night before. Inside, the clatter of dishes and low murmur of conversation provided cover. He watched the back entrance, the side alley, and the street beyond. She had moved with calculated precision. Every action, it seemed, was a layer of camouflage. And yet, in that careful behavior, he detected a trace of familiarity, something almost human, that the people orchestrating her disappearance could never fully suppress. He pulled out the folder and began mapping connections. The doctor, the shell companies, the payments, the false identities, every line of ink told a story. Each signature, another thread in the web he was unraveling. He felt a mixture of anger and clarity. The anger was for the year stolen, for the grief imposed, for the life denied. The clarity was for the chance to right a fraction of that wrong, to expose the network that had turned death into a tool. A message flashed on the burner phone she had given him. Move, safe location, now. He slipped out of the cafe, heart racing. The city, which had felt like a maze, suddenly seemed claustrophobic. He zigzagged through side streets, careful to stay in motion, alert to the smallest disturbance. When he reached the safe house, a nondescript apartment on the 5th floor of a weathered building, he paused to catch his breath. The door opened before he could knock. She was there, pale but determined, checking over the room with trained eyes. "You made it," she said quietly, not with relief, but acknowledgement. "I had no choice," he replied, placing the folder on the table. "They're tightening the net." She nodded, her eyes darkening. They always do, for hours. They worked together, silent except for the low murmur of plans, notes, and observations. He was learning to read her movements, her instincts, her ways of sensing danger before it appeared. Every precaution she had taken over the last year was now a lesson in survival for him. He discovered the depth of control the organization had. Manipulated medical reports, coerced officials, rapid identification of anomalies. They had created a system where no one could breathe without permission. And he had stepped into it, uninvited and fully aware. They paused only when exhaustion threatened to cloud judgment. Outside, rain fell softly against the window, the city lights glinting on wet pavement. It was a deceptive calm. Inside, they cataloged contacts, double-checked the folder, and cross-referenced names against public records. Slowly, patterns emerged, faint but undeniable. The doctor was central to multiple accidental deaths. Shell companies provided cover for transactions, and a handful of intermediaries acted as buffers between reality and the fabricated narratives. The scale was staggering. They were not just a group hiding one life. They were orchestrating multiple disappearances, and the consequences of exposure were unpredictable. He felt the weight of responsibility keenly. Every step he took outside, every interaction, every choice could compromise her. Yet in the same moment, the responsibility gave him clarity, focus, and fear. No longer immobilized him, it informed him. He moved, calculated, and anticipated. For the first time in a year, he felt empowered. A sharp sound outside made them both tense. Footsteps on the stairwell. Someone was close. They exchanged a glance, instinct and trust guiding them. He hid the folder beneath a loose floorboard while she positioned herself to monitor the entry. The door creaked as it opened, but it was empty. A courier, perhaps, leaving a package for the building, harmless, still. The alertness remained, a constant hum of vigilance. Hours passed with the steady rhythm of planning, mapping, and quiet observation. By the time dusk fell, the outlines of their next moves were clear. They would need to collect further evidence, engage trustworthy allies, and force the exposure of the network without alerting the orchestrators. Risk was inevitable. Failure would be catastrophic. But retreat was no longer an option. He looked at her across the small room, noting the strain in her posture, the alertness in her eyes. She had lived under threat for a year, adapting and surviving. Yet the quiet moments revealed fragility, humanity still intact. Despite years of hiding, he felt a surge of determination. She deserved truth, closure, and justice, even if it demanded everything from them both. Finally, he stood, stretching muscles cramped from sitting and staring. "Tomorrow, we start the next phase," he said. "We move faster, more precise. We force their hand." She nodded. "We have to. They won't wait for us to catch up." The night stretched long, filled with meticulous planning and quiet conversation. Outside, the city pulsed with life indifferent to the unseen struggle. Inside, two lives, bound by loss and betrayal, began to intertwine in a fragile alliance, ready to challenge a system that had taken everything from them. The danger was real. The stakes were high. And somewhere in the darkness, those who had orchestrated the disappearances would learn that the ghost of a widow's death and the man who refused to accept it could not be contained. He prepared for sleep briefly, knowing dawn would demand action. Yet, even in rest, his mind churned with possibilities, contingencies, and the relentless drive to reclaim truth. The folder lay beside him, a testament to the injustice they had suffered, a map of a network that believed itself untouchable, and for the first time since the funeral, he felt a spark of something that resembled hope. He woke before sunrise, the city still wrapped in the faint gray of morning, and the adrenaline from the previous night refused to release its grip. Every sound outside, tires on wet asphalt, footsteps echoing along narrow alleys. The distant hum of a train felt like a signal, a test, a warning. He dressed quickly, layered his jacket, and secured the folder once more. The burner phone rested against his chest in a pocket, silent for now, but he knew it could vibrate with a threat or instruction at any moment. They agreed on a meeting point at the edge of the industrial district, a location neither exposed nor overly conspicuous, where abandoned warehouses created corridors and hiding spots, offering them leverage in the open air. She had been here before, he realized, noting the calm efficiency with which she navigated the streets, turning corners without glancing back, crossing intersections with precision. Every step she took revealed a discipline forged by a year of hiding, by constant awareness that every shadow might conceal a watcher. The first contact came in the form of a narrow alley, where she motioned him to wait behind a stack of crates. From the corner of his eye, he saw her approach a side door of a dilapidated warehouse. A man emerged, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face partially hidden beneath a hood. He carried a briefcase, his movements casual but deliberate. The way she met him, subtle nods, controlled gestures suggested they were exchanging more than pleasantries. He crouched slightly, straining to hear, but the distance muffled any words. Still, the tension radiated. This was not a social call. It was business. Dangerous business. When she turned back to him, her face was neutral, but the shadow under her eyes betrayed fatigue. "They know we're moving," she whispered. "Every step from now counts. One mistake, and everything collapses." "I'm ready," he replied, though the weight of the past 24 hours pressed heavily on him. The city had become a labyrinth of potential threats. Each street, each corner, each idle passerby could hide eyes trained to report, to interfere, to silence. But he had no choice. Every moment wasted allowed them to adjust, to tighten their control, to erase evidence further. They moved swiftly, slipping through narrow streets, crossing into quieter areas, pausing only when vehicles passed too closely. He noted every detail: license plates, reflections in windows, the way shadows shifted with the streetlights. Survival demanded awareness, and he was learning quickly under her guidance. The folder felt like a lifeline against a backdrop of relentless danger. In its pages lay proof, hints, and threads that could expose not just her staged death, but the machinery behind it. They reached a warehouse, partially hidden by rusting scaffolding and abandoned vehicles. Inside, the air was heavy with dust and the faint metallic tang of old machinery. She led him to a table stacked with files and documents, the remnants of what appeared to be weeks of investigation. He ran his hands over them, noting connections, dates, names, patterns in movements. The network they faced was vast and meticulous, a structure built to erase and manipulate without leaving obvious traces. He realized the stakes were higher than he had imagined. This was not just about one falsified death. It was about systemic exploitation. An exposure would threaten powerful interests. Hours passed as they mapped, cataloged, and cross-referenced, voices low, occasionally pausing to listen for unexpected intrusions. The risk was omnipresent. One careless sound could draw attention. Yet despite the tension, a grim satisfaction began to build. They were constructing the framework to challenge those who had believed themselves untouchable. Every verified link, every pattern identified, every anomaly documented was a small victory in an otherwise overwhelming landscape. Late in the afternoon, she pulled a small laptop from her bag, connecting it to a secure network he hadn't known existed. "We need to simulate their responses," she said. "If we pressure in the wrong place, they'll adapt. We need leverage without exposure." He nodded, fascinated by her precision. This wasn't panic. This was strategy. Every move calculated, every consequence weighed. He observed, learning, absorbing, realizing that while he had been consumed by grief and rage, she had been planning, surviving, preparing for the moment truth could be reclaimed. The depth of her foresight impressed him, even as it reminded him of the danger they faced. By dusk, the network map sprawled across the table was nearly complete. The connections were clear enough to suggest courses of action, but still required delicate execution. "Tomorrow, we initiate," she said. Her tone was calm, resolute, yet tinged with exhaustion. "We hit the nodes simultaneously. Public exposure, legal pressure, verification from multiple sources. Anything less, and we risk collapse." He studied her face, noting the fatigue and the fire behind her eyes. "And if they retaliate," he asked. "Then we are prepared," she said simply. "Prepared enough to survive." The words carried weight, but he recognized the truth beneath them. Preparation was all they had. The organization that had manipulated her death was precise, relentless, and resourceful. They would respond, and any misstep could be catastrophic. Yet, in that truth, he found determination. He had come this far. He would not turn back now. As they left the warehouse under the cover of shadows, he felt a strange clarity. The fear that had clawed at him since spotting her on the train was no longer paralyzing. It had been replaced by focus, by strategy, by the recognition that the fight ahead required every ounce of his intellect and courage. The city, sprawling and indifferent, seemed a little less hostile, the night a little less threatening, because he now understood the rules of engagement. Returning to the temporary safe house, they secured the folder and devices, double-checking their perimeter and confirming plans. Sleep would be minimal, preparation continuous, and vigilance constant. Yet, despite exhaustion, there was purpose. They were no longer passive actors in a story written by others. They were reclaiming agency, constructing their own narrative amid layers of deception. As he finally allowed himself to rest, sitting on the edge of the cot with the city's dim lights filtering through the blinds, he realized that this journey begun with grief, fueled by shock and sharpened by betrayal, was evolving. Survival was no longer the goal. Action, exposure, and justice were. And somewhere, beneath the looming threat, the woman he thought he had lost a year ago remained not just alive, but a force to be reckoned with. He awoke before dawn, the sky still a bruised gray, and the tension from the previous day clinging to his muscles like a second skin. Sleep had been shallow, punctuated by images of shadowy figures moving through the streets, knocking at doors, whispers carried on the wind. He dressed quickly, layering clothes that allowed for movement and concealment, then gathered the folder once more, ensuring the papers were tucked securely inside a waterproof sleeve. The burner phone rested in his pocket, silent but ready, a lifeline and a warning in one. Today would demand every ounce of focus he could summon. They agreed to meet near a disused warehouse district, a location carefully chosen to balance cover with oversight. Rusted metal scaffolding, abandoned vehicles, and cracked concrete provided both barriers and vantage points. It was the kind of place where an encounter could unfold without attracting attention from the outside world. Yet where every step carried risk, he arrived first, hiding in the shadow of a stacked pile of crates, heart hammering, ears straining for any anomaly. The city beyond the district was waking slowly, indifferent to the machinations unfolding in its quieter corners. She appeared quietly, moving with the precision and caution of someone who had spent a year living in constant awareness of surveillance and threat. His chest tightened at the sight. She was alive, real, and yet not the woman he remembered from his memories of domestic warmth and intimacy. She was sharpened by fear and experience, her movements economical, every glance and gesture measured. They walked together, side by side but with careful distance, as if testing the air for danger. Every corner, every doorway, every reflection in a puddle was observed with meticulous attention. They reached a warehouse entrance she had indicated. He crouched, observing from the shadows as she approached a man who emerged, hood up, carrying a slim briefcase. Their interaction was brief, almost imperceptible nods, subtle hand gestures, shifting positions, but it radiated significance. He could feel the tension in the air, recognize it without hearing a word. It was a business meeting, cloaked as a casual encounter, fraught with invisible rules and potential hazards. When she returned to him, her face was neutral, but the faint line of tension beneath her eyes betrayed the strain of navigating threats constantly. "They know we're moving," she whispered. "Everything we do now is under surveillance. One mistake, one misstep, and it's over." He nodded, understanding the gravity. "Then we move with purpose." They slipped through alleys, crossed streets with careful timing, and paused only when necessary. His awareness heightened. Every passerby, every vehicle, every shadow could hide eyes trained to report and intervene. He noticed the rhythm of her surveillance, how she used her body to obscure herself, how she gauged sight lines, how she adjusted her pace to remain unpredictable. He marveled at the discipline, while feeling the weight of his own exposure. Each miscalculation could not only compromise him, but also put her life at risk. Inside the warehouse, dust hung thick in the air, the smell of aged metal and damp concrete filling their lungs. She led him to a corner where stacks of files and documents lay organized with obsessive care. He ran his fingers across the piles, taking in the scope, patterns of transactions, dates of unusual activity, connections between individuals who should have remained unconnected. He felt both awe and despair at the meticulous nature of the operation they were uncovering. It was vast, structured, and terrifyingly precise. For hours, they worked in silence or whispered discussion, cataloging, cross-referencing, and piecing together a picture of a network designed to erase lives. Every detail mattered: the timing of falsified documents, the subtle manipulation of officials, the logistical support that enabled movement and concealment. He realized that this network had likely orchestrated multiple disappearances, not just her staged death, and that exposing them would require precision, courage, and timing. A faint noise outside prompted a tense pause. Footsteps, measured and deliberate, echoed faintly through the empty corridors. She motioned him to remain low, observing as the shadow passed. It was a courier, delivering a small package, seemingly harmless, yet enough to remind them that the danger was omnipresent. They could not afford lapses, not for a moment. Each movement, each decision, needed to be considered in the context of survival and strategy. As dusk approached, the outlines of their next moves were clear. They would need to collect additional evidence, engage trustworthy allies, and orchestrate exposure without tipping off the orchestrators. The plan required synchronization, timing, and a level of discipline he had never experienced before. The stakes were immense. One misstep could destroy the fragile progress they had made. He looked at her, noting both the fatigue and the fire in her eyes. She had endured a year of threats and concealment, yet remained resolute. In that observation, he found both inspiration and a sense of urgency. She deserved the truth, the justice they sought, and the chance to live freely, unshackled by the fear imposed upon her. His own grief had transformed into purpose. He would not let fear or fatigue deter him. They secured the warehouse, checking windows and doors, ensuring no trace of their presence would remain. The city beyond continued its indifferent hum, unaware of the two lives moving carefully within its shadowed corners. Sleep would be minimal, planning continuous, and vigilance constant. Yet, even amid exhaustion, there was purpose, a clarity born of confrontation with both loss and betrayal. Sitting on the edge of a worn wooden crate, he reflected on the year that had passed. Grief had taught him endurance, shock had sharpened his senses, and now, with injustice and danger pressing in, he had learned focus. Survival was no longer sufficient. Action, strategy, and exposure were necessary. He glanced at her as she reviewed documents, noting the subtle weariness, yet unwavering determination. Together, they had become something formidable, an alliance forged in shared trauma and the drive for retribution. Finally, he allowed himself a brief rest, mind buzzing with contingencies, potential threats, and the framework of the plan ahead. The folder lay open, a tangible representation of the injustice they faced and the evidence they needed to wield. Outside, the city pulsed with life, oblivious to the unfolding drama in its midst. Inside, two people bound by grief and betrayal, prepared to challenge a system built to erase lives, determined to reclaim the narrative and confront those who had assumed they could control fate without consequence. He closed his eyes briefly, knowing that dawn would bring another day of careful maneuvering, meticulous execution, and unrelenting vigilance. Sleep offered only fleeting reprieve. Yet even in those moments, the drive to act, to expose, and to seek justice burned bright. They were no longer passive participants in a story written by others. They were reclaiming control, preparing to confront the shadowed forces that had dictated the terms of their lives for far too long. He spent the early morning reviewing the folder again, tracing connections with methodical precision, committing each name, date, and anomaly to memory. Outside, the city was waking, unaware of the quiet war unfolding in its streets. Each step he took would be scrutinized by eyes he could not see, and he felt the weight of every decision pressing against him. The previous encounters had revealed the scale of the operation: meticulous, methodical, ruthless. It wasn't just a single staged death. It was a network built to manipulate, erase, and intimidate. He realized that the folder in his hands wasn't just proof, it was a weapon. If wielded with precision, she arrived quietly, as always, moving with a practiced grace that belied her exhaustion. He noted the slight strain in her shoulders, the way her eyes scanned the surroundings before settling on him. They exchanged no words at first, understanding that caution came before conversation. The warehouse they had agreed upon was dimly lit, a mix of natural light filtering through cracked windows and the glow of their laptop screens. The quiet hum of the city outside contrasted sharply with the tension inside, making every sound within the warehouse seem amplified. They began with the patterns, retracing her movements over the past year, cross-referencing them with transactions, medical documents, and company records. Each thread they followed revealed more about the organization behind her disappearance. It was sophisticated, with layers of obfuscation designed to prevent discovery. Every misstep had been anticipated, every loose end meticulously tied. As he absorbed the details, a chilling realization set in. The organization had been operating for years, and countless lives had been affected, manipulated, or erased without a trace. Hours passed in a tense rhythm of analysis and discussion. He marveled at her ability to maintain focus despite the constant pressure and fatigue. She had become a master of observation, reading subtle cues, anticipating risks, and calculating contingencies with near-perfect accuracy. He, on the other hand, had to learn quickly, matching her vigilance with his own observations and insights. The stakes were higher than either of them had initially grasped, and the margin for error was vanishingly small. A noise outside made them both freeze, a distant footstep echoing through the alley adjacent to the warehouse. She gestured for him to stay low, moving silently toward the window. He watched her, noting the subtle cues of her scanning, the way her posture shifted, signaling attention and readiness. The sound passed without incident, but the reminder of danger lingered, sharpening their focus. The city, with its routine and oblivion, was deceptive. Every mundane element could conceal a threat. By mid-afternoon, they had identified key nodes within the network: individuals, companies, and touch points that could be leveraged to expose the truth. They planned carefully, aware that any sudden action could provoke retaliation. Their approach required precision, gathering evidence, coordinating communication, and timing exposure to maximize impact while minimizing risk. Each decision had to be weighed against potential consequences, a delicate balance between action and survival. He studied the connections, noting redundancies, false leads, and weak points in the structure. She guided him, pointing out subtle indicators he might have overlooked. The timing of transactions, the choice of shell companies, patterns in communication that suggested hidden oversight. Together, they reconstructed a web that had seemed impervious, revealing vulnerabilities that could be exploited to shift the balance of power. He felt a grim satisfaction in piecing the puzzle together, even as the enormity of the danger became increasingly clear. Evening fell, casting long shadows across the warehouse floor. They paused briefly, sitting across from one another, eyes tired but minds alert. Outside, the city lights reflected in puddles on the street, a reminder that the world continued, indifferent to the threats and plans unfolding within its midst. She looked at him, her expression a mixture of weariness and determination. "Tomorrow," she said softly, "we begin the next phase. Every step must be precise, every action calculated. We can't afford mistakes." He nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle fully upon him. The folder, the evidence, the knowledge of what had been done to her, all demanded action. Fear was present, but it had transformed into a tool, sharpening his instincts rather than immobilizing him. He had become a participant in a story of survival and justice, forced to navigate shadows, deception, and danger with clarity and resolve. They left the warehouse under the cover of darkness, moving through alleys and side streets, careful to avoid attention. Every movement was deliberate, measured, a dance of awareness and stealth. He was learning quickly, attuned to her subtle cues, understanding the language of survival she had honed over the past year. Each step reinforced the gravity of their mission and the risks inherent in confronting an organization that had operated in secrecy for so long. Back at the temporary safe house, they secured the materials, checked entry points, and reviewed the plan for the next day. The city beyond continued its ordinary rhythm, oblivious to the life or death strategy being orchestrated within its shadows. He felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration, the adrenaline of vigilance mingling with the clarity of purpose. Sleep, when it came, would be brief, but rest was secondary to preparation. They were no longer merely survivors. They were active agents in reclaiming the truth. He sat on the edge of the cot, the folder open beside him, reviewing key points, tracing connections once more, committing details to memory. Outside, the city breathed quietly, unaware of the web of deception, and the small group determined to dismantle it. Inside, determination and focus replaced grief and shock, creating a resolve that had not existed a year ago. They were readying themselves for confrontation, for exposure, for a reckoning that would demand every ounce of courage and precision they could muster. As he finally allowed himself to lean back, eyes scanning the dimly lit room, he realized the journey had changed him. Grief had taught him endurance. Shock had honed his instincts. Now, purpose, strategy, and the pursuit of justice would define his actions. The organization that had attempted to erase lives would find that the consequences of underestimating a man who refused to accept the death of his wife and a woman who had survived it could be both swift and unrelenting. He felt a spark of resolve, a clarity that illuminated the path ahead. Tomorrow, the reckoning would begin. The next morning, he awoke with a sense of inevitability pressing against his chest. The city outside was cloaked in a pale light, the streets slick with overnight rain, and the air carried the faint hum of early traffic. He dressed quickly, layering for both mobility and discretion, and ensured the folder was secure in its protective sleeve. The burner phone rested in his pocket, silent but ready, a constant reminder of the stakes. Today would demand calculated action, precision, and the courage to confront forces far beyond what he had ever imagined. They met at a quiet corner near the river, the footbridge serving as both a landmark and a neutral zone. She arrived without fanfare. Coat collar turned up, eyes scanning for any sign of pursuit. His pulse quickened at the sight of her alive, alert, and carrying the weight of the past year in her movements and posture. Together, they moved through the city streets, careful to blend into the flow of morning commuters, every step measured, every glance intentional. Inside the warehouse they had designated as a temporary base, he spread out the folder again, examining the documents with meticulous care. Each page revealed layers of deception, falsified medical records, manipulated official reports, and financial transactions linking a network of individuals whose influence extended far beyond what he had initially realized. The scope of the operation was staggering, a coordinated web designed to erase and control lives with ruthless efficiency. He felt a mix of fear and determination, understanding that exposing this network would require both ingenuity and audacity. She guided him through the evidence, pointing out subtle details. He might have missed the timing of certain transactions, the way documents were routed through shell companies, and the carefully orchestrated signatures that created the illusion of legitimacy. Every observation reinforced the reality that they were up against an organization that operated with precision and foresight. It was not simply a case of deceit. It was a machine designed to manipulate, intimidate, and eliminate threats. They had been living in its shadow without realizing the full extent of its reach. Hours passed in intense focus, mapping connections, analyzing patterns, and developing strategies. They identified key nodes, individuals, companies, and logistical points that could serve as leverage for exposure. Each discovery was a small victory, yet the danger remained omnipresent. One misstep could compromise the operation, alert the orchestrators, or put them directly in harm's way. He marveled at her skill, the way she navigated the evidence and planned contingencies. Her mind honed by a year of evasion and survival. He realized that his own instincts, sharpened by grief and shock, were becoming more precise, more attuned to the dangers and nuances of their mission. Mid-afternoon brought an unanticipated complication. A message appeared on the burner phone. "They know, adjust plans immediately." The simplicity of the message belied the gravity of its meaning. Surveillance had identified activity linked to him. The network was aware of their investigation. He felt a cold ripple of fear, but it was tempered by resolve. Panic would be dangerous. Strategy would be life-saving. They moved swiftly, gathering necessary materials and relocating to a secondary safe location. The streets felt narrower, more threatening. Each passerby, a potential observer. Every movement was deliberate, calculated, and measured against the possibility of being followed. They paused in alleys, ducked behind walls, and used shadows to mask their presence. The city, once familiar, had become a labyrinth of potential threats. Yet, within this tension, a sense of purpose crystallized. They were no longer simply reacting. They were planning, maneuvering, and reclaiming agency. Back at the secondary location, they reviewed the folder and outlined their next steps. Public exposure, legal documentation, and coordination with trustworthy allies would be critical. They developed contingency plans for each scenario, ensuring that evidence could be disseminated quickly and securely. Every line drawn, every connection mapped, and every potential response calculated added to the precision of their strategy. The stakes were immense, but the clarity of purpose provided focus. As evening descended, they paused to catch their breath. She leaned against the wall, her face reflecting fatigue, yet her eyes were sharp, scanning for any sign of intrusion. He observed her, noting the resilience that had carried her through a year of concealment and danger. The bond forged through shared urgency and mutual trust was palpable, though unspoken. Together, they had transformed from survivors into orchestrators of their own agency. Determined to confront the shadowy forces that had dictated their lives, nightfall brought a quiet intensity. They mapped routes, identified secure points, and synchronized communication plans. Every detail, every precaution was scrutinized. The network they were challenging was sophisticated, but the combination of evidence, timing, and strategy offered them a chance. They had turned the tools of survival into instruments of exposure. Finally, he allowed himself a brief moment to reflect. The folder lay open beside him, its contents a roadmap to justice, or, at least, exposure. Outside, the city thrummed with life, unaware of the invisible war taking place within its streets. Inside, two people, bound by grief, betrayal, and determination, were preparing to confront a system designed to erase truth. The night stretched long, filled with planning, vigilance, and quiet moments of reflection. They were no longer passive victims. They were active participants in reclaiming narrative, truth, and justice. He closed his eyes briefly, knowing that the coming day would demand action, courage, and absolute focus. Every decision would matter. Every movement could trigger a chain of consequences. Yet beneath the weight of responsibility, a spark of determination burned brighter than fear. They were ready to confront the orchestrators, expose the network, and ensure that the truth, finally, could no longer be buried The night stretched long, the city outside quiet yet alive with unseen movements, while inside the safe house, he and she worked methodically, tracing every thread in the tangled web of deception, maps, documents, and computer screens created a fortress of information around them, each piece of evidence a stepping stone toward the truth. The organization that had orchestrated her disappearance was intricate, sophisticated, and ruthless, and every detail they uncovered revealed just how carefully lives could be manipulated and erased without leaving obvious traces. He felt a mixture of awe and fear as he realized the scale of what they were confronting. Hours blurred together. They cross-referenced names, traced financial transactions, and examined patterns of communication, each discovery built upon the last, gradually revealing the network's structure and vulnerabilities. They identified key individuals whose actions had kept her hidden, shadowy intermediaries whose loyalty could be leveraged, and inconsistencies in documents that suggested pressure points for exposure. The stakes were immense. Even a single error could compromise the entire operation, put their lives at risk, or alert the people they were investigating. They paused only briefly to eat, their attention never leaving the maps and files spread across the table. Every street, every office, every pattern mattered. He noticed how she could scan a set of documents and immediately highlight anomalies that would have taken him hours to detect. She moved with the precision of someone who had lived a year in constant alertness, every gesture efficient and purposeful. He learned quickly, matching her attention to detail, noting shadows, reflections, and the smallest clues that could indicate danger. He had once believed grief was his greatest burden. Now, vigilance and analysis consumed him. Late in the afternoon, a subtle vibration in the burner phone snapped his attention forward. A short message. "They've noticed movement. Adjust immediately." The terse text carried an urgency that made his pulse spike. Surveillance had picked up their presence, their investigation. The network was alert. He felt a cold ripple of fear, but steadied himself with determination. Panic would be fatal. Precision, planning, and controlled movement were their only shields. They quickly packed essential files, maps, and devices into waterproof containers and backpacks, then moved silently through a series of narrow streets to a secondary safe location. The city felt claustrophobic in the early evening. Shadows loomed, and every passerby could conceal an observer. They paused only when necessary, blending into groups of commuters or slipping behind unlit corners. Every action was deliberate, measured, calculated against the possibility of detection. The weight of responsibility pressed upon him. Not only was he navigating his own survival, but he was safeguarding her and the evidence that could expose the network. Once inside the secondary safe house, they spread out their materials and began the next phase. Planning the exposure, they divided tasks, verification, documentation, and contact with trustworthy allies who could corroborate their findings without being compromised. They mapped sequences of events, potential responses, and contingencies for every scenario. Each plan was detailed, precise, and layered, designed to force a reaction from the organization while protecting themselves. The folder, once simply a collection of evidence, had become the backbone of strategy, a tangible guide toward justice. Evening fell, and the tension remained, heightened by exhaustion. They shared brief moments of quiet reflection, noting the strain of long hours under constant alertness. Yet despite fatigue, their focus was unwavering. They had moved from reaction to calculation, from victims to architects of their own plan. The fear that had initially driven him had transformed into purpose. Survival was no longer enough. Exposure, confrontation, and justice were the goals, and every decision was measured toward achieving them. At one point, a distant sound, a loose shutter rattling in the wind, made them freeze. They scanned the room, instinctively adjusting positions and monitoring exits. Their awareness had become second nature. Every noise, every movement was a potential signal of threat, the realization was stark. Their adversaries were relentless, sophisticated, and capable, yet the detailed evidence they had gathered provided a rare advantage. Knowledge, precision, and careful execution were now their only weapons against an invisible but powerful opponent. By nightfall, the structure of their approach was nearly complete. Public exposure, legal pressure, and corroborated evidence had been aligned in a timeline designed to maximize impact while minimizing personal risk. They rehearsed sequences, evaluated responses, and noted contingencies. Understanding that timing and coordination were critical, every choice carried weight, and every misstep could unravel months of effort. He glanced at her, noting the faint lines of fatigue etched into her face, the tension in her shoulders, and the steady determination in her eyes. She had endured a year of fear, isolation, and calculated evasion, yet remained resolute, ready to act decisively. Observing her, he felt both admiration and a renewed sense of responsibility. Together, they were reclaiming agency over a story that had been manipulated by others, preparing to challenge the invisible forces that had dictated the terms of their lives. Finally, he allowed himself a brief moment of pause, reviewing the folder one last time for the day. The city outside continued its indifferent rhythm, oblivious to the careful orchestration of strategy within its streets. Inside, the two of them prepared mentally for the challenges ahead, understanding that the coming hours and days would test their skills, courage, and resilience to the limit. The past year of grief, shock, and hidden danger had culminated in this moment, a decision to act, to expose, and to reclaim the narrative that had been stolen. He lay briefly on the edge of a cot, eyes scanning the dimly lit room, mind racing through plans, potential threats, and contingencies. Sleep would be minimal, but his focus remained sharp. Outside, the city thrummed quietly, unaware of the battle unfolding within its confines. Inside, determination and strategy replaced fear, grief, and uncertainty. They were no longer merely surviving, they were acting, orchestrating, and preparing for confrontation. With the night deepening, he knew that dawn would demand immediate action. Every move would be critical, every decision consequential. But within the weight of responsibility, a spark of clarity and resolve burned bright. They were ready. The organization that had tried to erase lives would soon discover that the widow who had survived and the man who had refused to accept her death were forces that could not be ignored, manipulated, or silenced. They were about to change the balance of power. The following morning arrived with a sharp clarity. The city bathed in pale sunlight that did little to soften the tension pressing in on them. He awoke with his mind already racing, reviewing the evidence, memorizing routes, and calculating contingencies. The safe house felt claustrophobic now, the walls closing in as the magnitude of their next steps settled over him. Every movement outside, every interaction, every decision carried consequences. The folder, now an almost sacred object, contained the roadmap to justice and danger. He tucked it securely beneath his jacket and checked the burner phone. No new messages, but he could feel the eyes of the organization lurking in the shadows, aware and alert. She arrived shortly after, moving silently, almost gliding, with the practiced precision of someone who had spent a year living under constant threat. He noted the tension in her shoulders, the subtle shift in her gaze that scanned the room for anomalies. Together, they exited the safe house, slipping into the streets with careful attention to patterns, reflections, and potential witnesses. The city was waking, unaware of the intricate dance of survival and strategy taking place among its shadows. Every pedestrian could conceal a watcher. Every passing car could be a vehicle for observation. The world seemed ordinary, yet it had never felt more dangerous. They made their way to a network of abandoned warehouses that she had used as rendezvous points in the past. The air was thick with the smell of damp concrete and rusting metal. Inside, they spread out documents, files, and digital devices. Creating a strategic command center, each piece of evidence was scrutinized: financial transactions, medical records, correspondence, and dates meticulously cross-referenced to reveal the organization's structure. The network was vast, its reach subtle and insidious, designed to manipulate, erase, and intimidate. He felt a mix of apprehension and awe, recognizing the enormity of what they were facing. This was not merely a personal vendetta, it was an exposure of a system that had operated in the shadows for years. Hours passed in methodical analysis. They traced connections between intermediaries, shell companies, and influential individuals. Each revelation carried implications. The deeper they dug, the more dangerous their mission became. They identified weak points in the network vulnerabilities that could be leveraged for exposure, but exploiting them required precision and timing. One miscalculation, one overlooked detail, could bring catastrophic consequences. Yet, the urgency of action outweighed fear. Survival alone was insufficient. They needed to strike effectively, decisively, and without hesitation. A subtle vibration on the burner phone broke the tension. He glanced at the screen. "They've noticed?" "Adjust." The brevity of the message belied the seriousness. The organization was aware of their activity. Every route, every contact, every movement could be scrutinized. He felt the cold press of danger, but it fueled rather than paralyzed him. Panic was a luxury they could not afford. Strategy and calculated action were essential. He shared the message with her, and they quickly adapted their plans, shifting locations and routes to maintain security while continuing their investigation. They moved through alleys and side streets, blending into the early morning flow of commuters, using shadows and obstructions to conceal their presence. Every step was deliberate, every pause calculated. He began to notice subtleties he had previously missed: a reflective window indicating observation, a tire turning at unusual angles, footsteps not matching the flow of the crowd. Her awareness guided him, and he mirrored her vigilance, learning to read the city as a landscape of potential threats. The city itself became a canvas of strategy, where ordinary elements masked extraordinary danger. At the secondary location, they reviewed the folder once more. Evidence needed context, corroboration, and strategic deployment. They discussed legal avenues, media contacts, and verification processes. Every action was planned to maximize impact while minimizing exposure. The documents, once simple proof of her disappearance, now represented leverage, strategy, and potential justice. They traced connections across jurisdictions, noting patterns that had been deliberately obscured, and developed a coordinated plan for simultaneous exposure and verification. Even as the afternoon waned, they remained hyper-aware, scanning exits, windows, and streets for anomalies. A stray vehicle or an unusual pedestrian could indicate observation. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him. Each decision had implications not only for his survival, but for hers, and for the integrity of the evidence they had collected. Yet the gravity of the situation sharpened focus, turning fear into precision. He had learned to anticipate, to observe, and to act with deliberate intent. By evening, their strategy had coalesced into a coherent plan. They would target critical nodes within the network, expose inconsistencies, and coordinate with trustworthy allies to amplify the impact while protecting themselves. Every sequence was rehearsed mentally, contingencies mapped, and roles defined. The city outside remained oblivious, its ordinary rhythm masking the intricate orchestration unfolding within the warehouse. Inside, two people, united by grief, betrayal, and determination. He had become architects of action, preparing to confront a network designed to control and manipulate lives. He paused briefly, glancing at her, noting both exhaustion and resolve. She had survived a year under constant threat, yet her focus remained unbroken. The admiration he felt was tempered by the weight of responsibility. Together, They had transformed from passive survivors into active agents of justice, prepared to challenge a system that had assumed control over their lives. The folder lay between them, a tangible embodiment of truth and strategy, while outside, the city pulsed, indifferent and unaware. Finally, as night deepened, he allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. The coming day would demand vigilance, courage, and precise execution. Every decision carried weight, every movement could trigger unforeseen consequences. Yet, amid the pressure, a spark of determination burned brighter than fear. They were no longer merely reacting to events imposed upon them, they were asserting control, reclaiming agency, and preparing for confrontation. The network that had orchestrated her disappearance would soon discover that the widow who had survived and the man who refused to accept her death were no longer powerless. The first rays of morning cut through the blinds, painting thin lines of light across the floor. He rose quickly, senses alert even before the coffee had finished brewing. The city outside seemed deceptively ordinary, yet he knew it was layered with invisible threats and observers. Every street corner, every reflected surface, every passerby could conceal a watcher. He dressed efficiently, layering for movement and discretion, and checked the burner phone. No messages. Not yet, but he could feel their awareness lingering like a shadow. Patient and relentless, she arrived at the agreed location without a word, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who had lived a year under constant vigilance. Her eyes scanned their surroundings, calculating and alert, reading invisible patterns in the city. They moved together through alleys and narrow streets, silent and deliberate, blending with the morning crowd. Each step was intentional, each pause strategic. He began to mirror her awareness. Learning the subtle language of movement and caution, she had mastered how to disappear into plain sight, how to anticipate observation, how to use ordinary spaces as cover. At the warehouse, they set up their workspace with meticulous care. Documents, maps, and digital devices were spread across tables, creating a strategic command center. They dove into the network again, analyzing transactions, communications, and connections with painstaking precision. Every detail revealed the organization's depth: shell companies, falsified records, manipulated officials. Each discovery underscored the stakes. They were not just exposing a single falsified death, but an intricate web of deception designed to control lives. The weight of this reality pressed heavily on him, yet it sharpened his focus and resolve. They traced communications, cross-referenced dates, and mapped logistical nodes that maintained the organization's operations. Every anomaly in the records was a potential lever. Every weak point, a possible opening for exposure. He realized the network's sophistication, the layers of obfuscation that had allowed them to operate undetected for years. It was terrifying and exhilarating. The folder, once a repository of evidence, now became the blueprint for action, a guide to dismantling a system that had assumed its power was untouchable. Hours passed as they coordinated strategy. He watched her work, noting the effortless precision with which she processed information, anticipated threats, and calculated contingencies. Her vigilance had become instinct, each observation revealing a lifetime of survival in a compressed year. He felt a mixture of admiration and responsibility. He had come into this unprepared, yet he was learning quickly, matching her attention to detail, noting patterns she might have overlooked, understanding the city as both ally and threat. Then the burner phone vibrated sharply, breaking the rhythm. A brief message. They are aware, adjust immediately. The simplicity of the text belied the urgency. The organization had detected their activity. Every move was under scrutiny, every plan potentially compromised. Fear flared, but he countered it with focus. Panic would only lead to mistakes. Precision and calculated action were the only path forward. He shared the message with her, and together they adjusted routes, timing, and observation points, moving fluidly through the city to a secondary safe location. The streets seemed alive with potential danger, Vehicles loitered at unusual angles. Pedestrians paused or glanced in ways that felt orchestrated. Every movement demanded attention. Every decision could tip off their observers. They navigated the environment like chess pieces, each step calculated, each pause deliberate. He felt his senses heighten, the adrenaline of survival, sharpening both awareness and resolve. The city had become a game board, and they were players moving cautiously against a hidden opponent. Once inside the secondary location, they reviewed the folder, cross-referencing and confirming connections. Legal avenues, media contacts, and verification points were mapped meticulously. They rehearsed sequences for exposure, ensuring evidence could be deployed without immediate compromise. Each step was calibrated to maximize impact while protecting themselves from the organization's reach. The folder, now a tool of strategy, contained both the truth and the leverage necessary to challenge a system built on secrecy and manipulation. As the day waned, their focus remained unbroken. Every window, door, and street outside was monitored, every potential intrusion considered. The stakes had never been higher. One misstep could unravel months of planning, exposing both of them to danger. Yet the clarity of purpose provided a stark contrast to the fear surrounding them. Grief had once defined him. Shock had honed his instincts, and now strategy and determination guided every action. He was no longer merely reacting, he was controlling, calculating, and asserting agency over a situation that had once seemed insurmountable. By dusk, they had finalized the sequence of actions. Critical nodes within the network were identified, timelines synchronized, and communication channels verified. Each task, each movement, and each contingency was rehearsed mentally. The city outside continued its indifferent rhythm, yet inside, the two of them operated in tense synchronization, ready to confront the forces that had dictated the terms of their lives for too long. They had transformed from passive participants into agents of action, prepared to challenge an organization that had assumed control without accountability. Finally, he allowed himself a brief pause, reflecting on the journey thus far. The past year of grief, shock, and hidden danger had culminated in a clarity of purpose. The folder lay open beside him, a tangible roadmap to exposure and justice. He understood that the coming day would demand courage, precision, and unwavering focus. The network they confronted would respond, adapt, and retaliate, but he and she were prepared. They had become orchestrators of their own fate, ready to reclaim the narrative and confront the unseen forces that had manipulated their lives. As night settled, he reviewed the plan one last time, internalizing contingencies and sequences. Every detail mattered. Every step was deliberate. The stakes were immense, yet within that tension burned a spark of determination that outshone fear. They were no longer passive, no longer victims. They were prepared to act decisively, to expose deception, and to force accountability from those who had believed themselves untouchable. The coming hours would test their skills, courage, and resolve. But he was ready. The morning air was crisp and heavy with anticipation. As he awoke, the city outside seemed calm, indifferent to the storm that had been brewing in the shadows for months. He dressed quickly, layering for mobility and protection, checking the folder for completeness. Every detail mattered. Every document could become leverage or liability. And he knew the organization they were challenging would exploit any oversight. The burner phone rested in his pocket, silent, yet he felt its presence like a heartbeat, always ready to deliver either instruction or threat. Today, the balance would shift. She arrived promptly at the rendezvous point, moving with the fluid precision he had come to expect. Her eyes scanned every street, every reflection, every potential observer. He followed closely, careful to maintain the rhythm she set, absorbing the discipline she had honed over a year of hiding. Each movement was calculated, deliberate, yet graceful, a study in survival under constant threat. He had grown accustomed to reading her cues, to understanding the subtle language of vigilance, and he matched her steps, learning to anticipate danger in a world where ordinary streets could conceal extraordinary threats. They entered the abandoned warehouse district, a maze of rusting scaffolding, decayed walls, and shadows. The smell of damp concrete and old metal hung in the air. Inside, they set up their temporary command center, maps, digital devices, and the folders spread across tables. Each document was scrutinized, every transaction traced, every inconsistency noted. They traced connections between shell companies, medical records, and orchestrated communications, revealing the organization's depth and precision. The network was not merely sophisticated, it was systemic, designed to manipulate, erase, and intimidate lives with surgical accuracy. He felt a cold resolve settle over him. The enormity of what they faced was terrifying, yet the clarity of purpose strengthened him. Hours passed in methodical analysis. They identified key nodes and intermediaries within the network. Vulnerabilities emerged, small gaps that could be leveraged for exposure. Though exploiting them required precision and timing, every step was weighed against potential consequences. One misstep could compromise evidence, endanger lives, or alert the orchestrators. Yet he pressed on, understanding that inaction would allow the organization to maintain control. They discussed strategies for dissemination, corroboration, and legal reinforcement, developing a multi-layered approach that accounted for surveillance, countermeasures, and retaliation. During a brief pause, a faint vibration on the burner phone signaled a new message. Movement detected. Adjust immediately. The terse alert underscored the immediacy of danger. The network was aware of their activities. Every route, every observation, every interaction could be tracked. Panic would be fatal. Precision, strategy, and controlled action were the only options. He shared the message with her, and they adapted quickly, altering paths and observation points. The city's streets, once mundane, became a chessboard where every step had consequence and every shadow might conceal a player. They moved through narrow alleys and quiet side streets, blending with the flow of early morning traffic. Using pedestrians and obstacles for cover, he had grown adept at noticing patterns, reflections, odd vehicle positioning, inconsistent footsteps. Each detail could indicate observation. Her experience guided him, showing him how to read the city as both battlefield and ally. The folder, once a passive record of injustice, now represented strategy, leverage, and the potential to dismantle the network that had controlled their lives. At the secondary safe location, they reviewed the folder, ensuring that evidence was verified, corroborated, and ready for strategic deployment. Legal avenues, trusted allies, and secure communication channels were mapped with exacting care. They rehearsed sequences, prepared contingencies, and outlined exposure strategies designed to maximize impact while minimizing personal risk. Each element had to align perfectly, for any error could nullify weeks of work and place them directly in danger. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily, but focus transformed the pressure into determination. As the afternoon progressed, they continued coordination, identifying additional points of leverage and potential witnesses who could support the credibility of the evidence without compromising themselves. They discussed sequencing, timing, and redundancy, ensuring that no single failure could derail the operation. The network's sophistication demanded patience, intelligence, and precision. The cost of miscalculation could be catastrophic. He felt both the fear and the exhilaration that came with navigating such high stakes, each revelation sharpening his resolve. By evening, their strategy was nearly complete. The map of connections, transactions, and intermediaries formed a coherent framework for action. They had built contingencies for every anticipated response, rehearsed communications, and synchronized exposure sequences. Outside, the city continued its indifferent rhythm, unaware of the quiet orchestration within its streets. Inside, The two of them, bound by shared trauma and determination, had transformed from survivors into agents of calculated action. They were ready to confront the orchestrators and reclaim control over the narrative that had been stolen from them. He paused briefly, taking in her determined expression, noting the subtle lines of fatigue and the unwavering focus in her eyes. She had endured a year of isolation, fear, and evasion, yet she remained resolute. His own growth was evident. Grief had sharpened his instincts, shock had strengthened his focus, and now strategy and purpose guided every decision. They were no longer passive participants in a story dictated by others. They were reclaiming their agency, orchestrating exposure, and preparing to force accountability from the system that had attempted to erase them. Finally, he allowed himself a brief rest, reviewing the folder one last time for the day. The city outside throbbed with life, oblivious to the careful orchestration of evidence, observation, and strategy within its confines. Inside, focus and determination eclipsed fear and grief. The coming hours would demand action, courage, and precise execution. Yet, within that pressure burned a spark of resolve. They were no longer victims. They were participants shaping the outcome. The organization that had believed itself untouchable would soon discover that a widow who had survived and a man who refused to accept her death could challenge even the most meticulous of schemes. Life often teaches us through loss, betrayal, and the shadows we least expect. Ethan's journey reminds us that even in the depths of grief and despair, courage can emerge. True strength isn't about avoiding pain. It's about facing it, seeking truth, and reclaiming agency over our own story. The hardest trials reveal the resilience within, showing that love, determination, and integrity can overcome even the most calculated deceptions. Healing comes not from forgetting the past, but from confronting it, learning from it, and choosing to act despite fear. Every challenge holds a lesson. The power to change our path lies within us, waiting for the moment we decide to rise. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. What would you do in Ethan's place? Don't forget to subscribe for more gripping, emotional stories that inspire courage and reflection. Your voice matters, and your journey of inspiration starts here.